Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1247th New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Rocío Aranda-Alvarado, Deborah Cullen-Morales, and Rodrigo Moura. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Rocío Aranda-Alvarado is an art historian and curator. She joined Ford Foundation in 2018 after serving as curator at El Museo del Barrio for nearly a decade. At Ford, she is a senior program officer on the Creativity and Free Expression team, focusing on support for arts and culture organizations across the US. At El Museo, she presented visual arts and programming that reflected the history and culture of El Barrio, as well as the greater US Latinx and Latin American diaspora. Deborah Cullen-Morales is a senior programs officer for arts and culture at the Mellon Foundation. Previously, she served as executive director of the Bronx Museum of the Arts, director and chief curator of the Wallach Art Gallery at Columbia University, director of curatorial programs at El Museo del Barrio, and curator of the print collection at Robert Blackburn's printmaking workshop. Her work is focused on modern and contemporary Latinx, Caribbean, and African American art. And our host today, Rodrigo Moura, is a writer, editor, and curator. He worked in Brazilian institutions such as Museu de Arte de São Paulo and Instituto Inotim. Moura is currently the artistic director of the Museo de Arte Latinoamericano de Buenos Aires. And with that, I will pass it over to Rodrigo to get us started.
Hi everybody, and also welcome on our behalf, speakers and moderator, to the 1247th New Social Environment program that I have been a fan of for its duration. I think now 5 years and counting. And I'm honored to present this program today around this timely and wonderful publication, a Handbook of Latinx Art, edited by our speakers this afternoon, Deborah Cullen-Morales and Rocío Aranda-Alvarado, and published by the University of California Press as part of the prestigious The Documents of 20th Century Art series. This is the first anthology. I think this is, would be maybe a great place to begin. The first anthology on Latinx art, period, which is interesting as, we have different framings of the field, but not with that more comprehensive ambition, which is, very exciting. Makes this publication really a fundamental contribution to our fields and beyond, museum studies, art history, Latinx art, curatorial practice, studies, etc. It's really a great book. I've been spending time with it. It's over 20 texts that are republished and gathered for the first time in a volume dating back from the 70s into the present, with quite impressive geographic range and artistic practice range. So really, really a wonderful asset resource for us to all refer to. This book was launched, I believe, back in the spring when I was, about to leave New York to relocate to Buenos Aires, where I have been living since March as artistic director of Malba with my family, this beautiful city, set to leave New York. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because New York is the link between the three of us here today. Deb and Rocío were my predecessors at El Museo at different curatorial capacities. So this is, for me, very exciting to reconnect with the Latinx conversation around this really fantastic publication that I'm, so happy to present and share with you all today here. The book is, as I say, comprised of different chapters, and there's also a beautiful visual anthology that we'll have a sneak peek of today here. So, Deb and Rocio, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, the Rail, for inviting me. It's a, true honor to be in conversation. So, if I may, please, to just, break the ice, I would like to ask a question that is, more very general, a little, biographical. Just, how did you first come across with the idea of Latino art and Latinx art and this field, how this field first presented to both of you? And then maybe we can talk about the book itself. But I just wanted to ask you this. Thank you.
Rocio, you have to unmute.
I was saying, Deb, you go first.
Okay. Well, thanks for Rodrigo. Thanks so much for having us in Brooklyn Rail. We're so proud to be here and be sharing this conversation with you all. That's a good question. How did the interest in Latinx art for me grow? I'm going to bring it back to where I always bring it back, Robert Blackburn. I worked for him when, many of you know, I worked for him when I was starting 18 or 19. And that was part of the beautiful community he created at the printmaking workshop, which is now the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, Robert Blackburn printmaking workshop after his passing. And he immediately brought me to Taller Boricua and El Museo. And that was just part of the constituency. So that's the beginning of my interest. And ultimately through him, how I wound up working at El Museo. But that's a longer story. But I did write a short text for another anthology, the New York and Diasporican Critical Anthology, edited by Arlene Davila and Yasmin Ramirez. Let's shout that out here today. Rocio, how about you?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I think Deborah and I were working towards the same purposes in different states at the same time, basically. When I first started working at Jersey City Museum, around 2000 maybe. Much like Queens, Jersey City is extremely diverse. It has a history that ranges from the late 18th to the early 19th century of large groups of immigrants coming. And rather than going to New York, they would just stay on the Jersey side of New York Harbor. And so the variety of languages spoken in Jersey City are vast. And so the museum's collection, which was a historic and modern collection, not really so much contemporary, reflected that diversity of immigrant backgrounds and the kind of industry that immigrants created in Jersey City. And thinking about contemporary artists that were living and working there, many of them staying on the Jersey side again because they had bigger spaces, they were less expensive than spaces in Brooklyn and parts of Queens. And so we had a large artist population. And, in order to reflect that historic diversity, the Jersey City Museum's mission was always to think about how to tell a full story of that history and to bring in voices that had previously not been heard or marginalized from larger institutions. And so one of the things I always did was think about, thematic exhibitions that drew from what artists were already doing and making sure to incorporate artists of diverse background as much as possible. And so I had, shows that were Latinx art shows, but we didn't think of them specifically in that way, just more broadly. But in general, wanting to support artists who hadn't had and didn't have opportunities. I remember, Deb and I would talk about one of the things we did was count how many US Latinx artists were included in any of the periodic shows that happened in New York, right? The Triennial at the New Museum, the Whitney Biennial, the show at PS1, the Studio Museum, when they did the shows, the freestyle and those subsequent exhibitions, we count how many US Latinx artists were in these exhibitions, and they were often a small number. So we started thinking about supporting Latinx artists early on, I would say. And it's part of the mission of Museo del Barrio also.
Yeah, of course. Great, thanks. I wanted to, just sort of move into the book territory more specifically, but I want to, acknowledge the use of the term Latinx without, creating much of a distraction out of this question. But I think, I do see a lot of people joining in today who are very familiar with this conversation, but there are others, just from, a wider audience perspective that I'm not so familiar. So if we could just, touch on that a little bit and talk, about this, the 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 choice for the term for your project specifically, not necessarily, having to, go back to an entire genealogy, but, just, in your perspective, how do you see the use of this term Latinx and how do you define it for your project?
I mean, I'll start by saying there's a lot of debate about terminology, and terminology has changed over the years from, pre-World War II, just calling Latin American artists, to Hispanic, to Latino, Latine, like et cetera. There's variations on all this. And I expect it's going to change into the future. And it's to me, it's an important and inclusive term. And I also think it's a US based term. And so for many reasons, we chose to use this term, but I actually find it somewhat uninteresting to have a big debate about the terminology. And I welcome anyone using the term that they wish to use it for themselves. And of course, I would never call a specific artist a Latinx artist. It's like a grouping, it's a handy handle grouping term for like Latin American. It's a construct, and I understand it as such. But everyone should name themselves, and I respect what they name themselves. Rocío, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was perfect. Just reiterating that we want people to self-name. That's for us the most important thing, um, to self-identify.
But
But
that's something extremely interesting. And then this is maybe, also a segue to move into the book itself and your research, which is also how it provided visibility, how it really granted visibility to a conversation that was not gaining the same kind of visibility, maybe in the eyes of the mainstream art world. I want to emphasize this. And that's, something I was very excited to follow during my years at El Museo. Full disclosure, I'm not from the US context. I'm, Brazilian curator with a global perspective and international career, working mostly with international artists in Brazil, a little bit outside too in the US, but and in Europe, but mostly in Latin America. And so I was excited to really follow this sort of new visibility that the term and the conversations around the term brought to the scene. No, I think there's a scene, and a lot of people like to think of it as a scene. And you say something really nice in your introduction of the book, which is like the diversity of sources, no? That it's not a single sourced conversation culturally, but it's really a diversity of sources in this kind of, meeting junction point that makes this conversation so exciting. So with that in mind, I would, just ask us to, maybe you, Rocio, to share a little bit about this project and the genesis, how this, this is a gap that we all recognize for many years. And now we've seen, finally a project that speaks to that. But, just, think about the project and how did it come about and yeah, the research maybe.
Sure. It's a great question. I mean, one of the things we observed, I've been teaching in the CUNY system for a very long time, Lehman College, City College, Hunter College. Last year, Deborah and I co-taught a course at the Institute of Fine Arts. And one of the things, we had already started working on this book. We realized early on that there wasn't a single book that you could use if you were going to teach Latinx Art 101. I'll just say one final thing about the naming. I think the most important thing about the naming is that we're talking about a US experience. We have seen where people use the word Latinx and they're talking about artists living and working in Latin America. We are specifically talking about artists living and working in the United States. So they have a lived experience here. That's sort of the most important part of the definition for us. But just to say, right, when you want to teach, especially the demographics are changing so quickly in New York. I've been teaching also at John Jay with my friend Claudia Callerman, and her student body has changed from Puerto Rican and Dominican, heavily Dominican to Central American and Mexican over the past, let's say, 5 or 6 years. And so you realize in order to teach students for something that they will care about, hold on to, feel a personal connection to, these kinds of texts became important. And the opportunity really came from a professor that Deb and I both worked with. Deb, maybe you want to tell that part of the story.
Sure. Dr. Jack Flam was a professor of ours at CUNY. We both went to CUNY Grad Center. And Dr. Jack Flam was a professor, and I worked pretty closely with him. I was a research assistant for him for some time, and I know he's a friend of the Rail, so a shout out, Dr. Flam. And I was just chatting with him, and he mentioned that, there was a need in compiling, primarily artist writings in the document series, that there was a real need and there was a lack of writings, by Latin artists of Latinx descent. So Rocio and I, as she mentioned, have been talking about this for some time and thinking together on this for, some time now, and just thought this was the great opportunity to do it. So that's part of where our focus was thinking a lot about artist writings and thinking a lot about things that were not easily accessible. And this is really important because there are some existing anthologies on Mexican American, Chicanx art, etc., but there's not one that brings them all together, key texts. And many of these key texts are found in out of published little catalogs that museums such as El Museo, created.
Did you all have like an archive, a go-to archive? I'm thinking of like, how the Houston archive has
Yes.
been, very much over the last years absorbing those primary sources. We all curators, we're always very, excited about primary sources circulating more and having new lives. We all have our own little, bins and boxes and shelves and Xeroxes and, iPhone photos. So I was thinking about MFA, of course, El Museo. So just share a little bit about this, just like the backhand or the trastienda of the research with us, if you may.
Yeah, the ICA archive online at through the Museum of Fine Arts Houston is like an incredible archive. But it's such a riches of material that, I mean, I don't even know how many thousands and thousands and thousands of documents are there now, scanned originals. You fall down that hole and it's amazing. But we really wanted to make like a greatest hits, top hits of that, so that people can then be pointed to other sources. And there's more and more sources coming out now, especially online digital sources, but of new writings as well. But yeah, we wanted to give people an entryway, like an easy entryway.
Yeah, I think that, thinking about that MFA Houston archive, those were things we turned to constantly when we were teaching. And I think we were also purposeful in thinking about which anthologies had already been published, like the Chicano anthology that Chon and um, Pilar and Rita, is it the three of them? Anyway, the archive, that anthology is super important. So we thought about which artists were already represented in anthologies that had already been published and thinking about a different text that we could publish so that they're complementary to one another rather than overlapping.
Yeah, and maybe that would, give us an opportunity to talk about like the, organizing parameters and parameters. I know we talked about this when we first met, just to prepare this conversation today. And I think the TOC is, very compelling how you navigate through different territories and how you, interweave sources and chronologies. So maybe if you could talk just about just a little bit about the organizing guiding principles for the publication itself would be great.
Who did you want to start?
You start.
Me? Okay. Well, I mean, I think we tried that was a big part of the work because we've been collecting, so many fabulous written texts already that there was, an embarrassment of riches there. And I think we were thinking about different structures, and this could be mixed and remixed and reorganized in many, many different ways. But in our thinking that this was an introductory text for the general reader, or perhaps an undergraduate student, someone who didn't have a lot of deep familiarity, really we didn't want to, reify, sort of identity-based readings of things, but there are waves of migrations. There are conversations that happened at certain times and certain periods that were driven by, certain groups in the country. And we just thought that was one of the easiest ways to organize it as an entryway. But there are themes that run through everything. Rocio, do you have something more to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just like try to also mention some of the texts and of the authors, because I've really found how, interesting to see like also the choice of the chronology, like starting in 71. So that would be great to cover.
Yeah, when we were thinking, I would say we rethought the table of contents a few times over, because one of the things we at first thought we would do is do away with the East Coast, West Coast binary. But we realized that it's actually the way the history has been written. It's the way the groups have immigrated and migrated within the United States. And of course, that's going to change across the decades, but the historic part, that's still accurate. Um, and in terms of, artists to select, when we were editing this and rereading all of the text, we were just so amazed again after rereading these essays how fantastic these artist writings are. And I think it's a credit, I think, to the University of California Press that they've been thinking about artist writings for so long. This whole series of documents of 20th century art is so important because the artist voice is crucial. And so we started to think about the different time periods that we wanted to look at, who had been writing, what exactly they were writing about. And so we were able to, I think, excavate so many of these really fantastic texts, including some that haven't been published before, talking about process, talking about priorities that all of these artists had. And so it's a really, I think, a nice mix of voices. I think Coco Fusco's essay is fantastic. I'm so excited for her show coming up at El Museo. She's just so brilliant, and just rereading this essay again just really underscored that. But also someone like Rafael Montañez Ortiz, whose earliest writings were about his invention of El Museo. Well, he did his dissertation at Columbia Teachers College and was thinking about arts education, really, and thought about El Museo as an artistic project that would be created in and with and for community. So it's really rich, all of these texts together.
And if I can just amplify that, yeah, so many of the artists, it's not just artist voices, but the artists, I mean, it is artist voices, which is so important, but it's the artists were not just making their work, they were also founding institutions and running curatorial programs and writing and curating. And it's amazing, what
Yeah,
they do.
I also wanted to just put a pin for a second on Ralph, no, Raphael, Ralph Rocio. You curated that, amazing project with him in the Jersey City Museum. That's such a major, publication, major inspiration, put so many important resources about his work. And then I also was very privileged at El Museo, I think in 2021 or two, I think 21, 22, sorry, to curate like a major retrospective as well with a lot of works from his, destruction period, works coming from Europe. But there's also this idea of intervention, no? How he really intervened in the art world and with his writing and with his foundation of El Museo in 1969. And that text, I think it's Culture and the People, right? It's 1971. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the earliest piece of writing you have in the book. And that's the text that came out on, I think, Art in America. That's, major, both like sort of like looking back at having created that museo and thinking of I think racialization would be the current term for artists working under ethno categorizations or something like this, right? So if we could just talk about Ralph just another second, because such a mentor and inspiration for us all.
I mean, such a key figure, um, that the show from 1988 at Museo del Barrio, I never saw. I only knew it through the archive at El Museo and through the catalog that was produced with a lot of really fantastic images. And the fact that he had lived and worked in New Jersey for over 30 years and never had an exhibition, never anywhere in the States. He would be part of group shows, but not sort of a solo show, really exploring his history and his work. His own archive, which he had amassed so that he could get promoted through the academic system at Rutgers University, was really rich. And I felt even in that exhibition at Jersey City Museum, I was only able to scratch the surface. I think one of my favorite sections in that exhibition is an entire wall of photographs that showed his historic performances. And I think one of the real triumphs of that show is that Deb was able to acquire something for El Museo. That's the work we're looking at now, actually. This is like, I think, one of the most important acquisitions, most important works in El Museo's collection. And there's this great black and white photograph of him standing in front of it too, which I think is important because it illustrates, like, I think exactly what you're saying, Rodrigo, sort of the racialization of him as an artist, which was less apparent in the late 60s when he was invited to go to Europe and help destroy things and at the Destruction and Art Symposium in London in 1967. Evoking him as a key figure in the history of American art is really important, I think, now more than ever.
Yeah, and
Oh,
the
can't
idea
agree more.
and the idea that he wanted to found a museum because he didn't find his own cultural experience, uh, validated or resonating anywhere. So he founded, it took time from his, artwork to found a museum. And if you look back at his original documents for the museum, as I know you both have, we haven't caught up to him yet. Like he was proposing, a virtual museum and looking
Yes,
at popular
yes.
arts along with fine arts and
So cutting edge, so cutting
Yeah,
edge. No,
the
so
tropical rainstorm. He proposed that
such a
tropical
visionary,
rainforest.
fabulous thinker. Yeah.
I can't even imagine, thinking of the population, New Rican, diasporican, Puerto Rican population in East Harlem who had never been able to experience El Yuque. They were born and raised in New York, maybe, and hadn't had the opportunity, for him to think about that. That was his experience too, right? Born and raised in Brooklyn. Never had the experience of being able to, until he was much older, to experience that rainforest. And so to think about creating an installation inside the museum that would mimic that for the local East Harlem population, it's like mind blowing.
Yeah, it's also one of like the most brilliant mistakes in history or like deviations because he was originally encargado, commissioned to create a curriculum, no, to think of like education and say, oh, you can't wait to see what I'm going to do because he then comes up with a museum, which is somehow like a total work of art on itself and with all this theoretical underpinnings, and it's just such a fascinating figure. And I'm so happy we could honor him for a minute during this talk because for me also the retrospective, it was an opportunity to put all this archaeological finds, and it gave me a lot of pleasure and pride to see how they're all placed in museums today. They were like the Whitney, Tate, MoMA, El Museo, Bronx Museum with this also fantastic work. on thinking of like racialized, marginated music artists in New York. So it was really for me one of the true highlights of my times in New York was when I put that show together. So yeah, I was happy we could honor Ralph. And but I just like fast track update, sort of deviating slightly from the book and moving into also your own work as um, philanthropists, strategists, right? So both of you have been amazing champions of Latinx initiatives in museums. So you supported, I have to be also transparent about this. You supported El Museo when I was there, and I benefited from, also all your support directly as a curator, as a chief curator there, and you still do this with different museums and different artists. So I just wanted to, to use this as maybe like a bisagra, no, like pivoting point for us to think about like the Latinx institutional landscape, right? So it's been the 5 years of the Latinx Fellowship have been completed. I believe 25 artists were is it no 15 times 5, right? So do I get that right? Do I get my math right? Yes. So 75 artists have been granted with a fellowship. So how do you see the landscape now? And if you could just offer us a little bit of your take on the, landscape changes over the last few years.
I mean, I'll start just because Teresita's work is on the screen and she's sort of the catalyst that really started, I think, museums thinking more broadly about U.S. Latinx art. In 2016, she started really in 2014, 2015, organizing a full day symposium talking about U.S. Latinx art and the future of museums. I'm thinking about the artists that had been excluded from permanent collections and exhibitions, but especially permanent collections. And I also wanted to clarify, and this is true, I'm sure, for Deborah's tenure too, that Museo del Barrio, as an important institution in the city of New York, was supported by both of our foundations before we got there, because the work was excellent already early on. So we weren't playing favorites. This is just part of that legacy of the museum and funders that have supported really good work. Teresita, I think, was able to have a conversation with Darren to talk about I think what's key here, and it ties to the word Latinx, is she was illustrating for many people. She's told us that she tried to educate as many people as possible about the difference between Latin American and a US Latino at the time was the word we used, experience. Which is vastly different. The market is different. The museum attention to those artists is different. So this was the purpose of the symposium that she created in 2016 to help people start to understand the difference between a blue chip art market for Latin American art and US Latinx artists who were not having that experience. And so when I came to Ford Foundation, I organized a series of national conversations in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in Houston, in Miami, and then again in New York, on the very same topic, inviting artists from those regions to talk about their experience with institutions and to sort of bring that conversation to the top. And many curators that I spoke to during that time really talked to me about how important they felt it was, and they wanted to see this change. And I think that with the Artists Fellowship that we were able to coordinate together, we were able to bring, I think, highlight and elevate these 75 artists who really represent so many more who are equally deserving of such a fellowship and whose works could also be in public collections. I feel like that's really been the thrust of that work.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add that just as we were so lucky to have gone to school together and then worked curatorially together in the field and then together closely at El Museo, Rocío went to Ford and Teresita did the conferences and brainstormed the conferences, and Rocío was carrying them out and I was attending some of them. And then she was at Ford, and as fate would have it, I wound up at Mellon Foundation. It wasn't a plan, it just happened. And here we are able to work together again. I was like, okay, now we're here. And it was the beginning of the pandemic. And we, sort of brainstormed an initiative where we can, try to help move things forward. And at the top of the pandemic, we thought the first and most important thing to do was to get money into the hands of artists. And so we reached out to USLAF and, fantastic partner, and brainstormed the fellowship, and just, were able to make a grant. So, USLAF could do these 75 Artists Awards. We also have another initiative with other funders, Tara and Getty, to support positions of artists who hold US Latinx art in their collections, who are specialists on the material, because that's another area, as we know, that's very under recognized. So that initiative is also ongoing, where we're supporting curatorial positions with that focus. So it's been really a blessing to work together.
I want to just, mention, that's fantastic. Pepon Osorio, since, his slides up now. And I was also in New York when he had his beautiful show at the New Museum. And Pepon, for me, has been really one of these, like, larger than life artists in a way, because his works can go places where others can't, I find, because of his his really how aesthetically articulated it is, and all the how he challenges this idea of representation and stereotypes in the media, in Hollywood, and and taste and all that. Um, so I wanted to bring up that show, which was fantastic, and we're seeing this wonderful work that has been at El Museo's collection. That was a Ford gift, right? So that was a Ford Foundation gift many years ago. And that work, I was happy to install it at Something Beautiful. This is the installation we will see here. But I wanted to actually ask us to talk about a change of perception, a change of reception, a change of access to the mainstream museum. No, obviously the museum is not a mainstream museum in the stricto sensu, but it's a museum downtown with different visibility of other museums we've been talking about in the New York ecosystem. That's something to acknowledge. So I just wanted this. There has been other amazing several examples of that in the recent past and in the immediate future. So if we could also talk about this, just to make sure those projects are, properly acknowledged and mapped out here in this conversation.
I feel like one of the things that makes me proudest of having been affiliated with the Museo del Barrio and spent so many beautiful years there is that when you look back at some of the artists who we know now, they were first supported at a Museo del Barrio. I mean, there's so many examples. I'll just give two. Alora Casadilla, who later represented the US in the Venice Biennale, were artists at Museo del Barrio years before that. Fidele Baez has now been acquired by many large institutions. She has excellent gallery representation. And
Just saw her work in the São Paulo Biennial 3 days ago.
see, amazing, right? And she was in the Venice Biennial last time or the time before. So another example of someone I remember, we saw her work when she was in the MFA student organization at Hunter, always had a benefit auction. And I remember there were people literally standing next to her very tiny little painting, so that no one would outbid them to win this piece at auction. And that was probably 2010, because we put her in the 2011 S files. So, it's just, I think, such an important role that small, and I would say small, museums and small cultural organizations play within the larger landscape of institutions, because the bigger institutions copy what the smaller institutions do, and very often the smaller institutions don't really get the credit they deserve. So it's so important to keep supporting.
Words, so important. Thanks for saying this. Absolutely true.
Right. Yes. We saw so many examples of larger institutions copying ideas, exhibitions, taking artists. And you know
It's
what?
called
It's fine.
curatorial extractivism.
Exactly, exactly.
It's a
It's fine.
thing.
We want those artists to have great careers and be in those collections. So, it's part of the work.
But there
It
should
is.
be kickback to the smaller organizations. Like there's a network of printmaking workshops across the country that have been supporting artists and small alternative spaces that have been the platforms for these institutions. And really, standing them up. And now we're starting to see, which is fantastic. We need all of it. We need both and, right? But we're starting to see like
I,
major.
I agree with that 100%. I remember right at the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, no, we were on a Zoom, several of us, the three of us with, much larger cohort, and we were discussing this. And a question that came up, it was like, should we bother the mainstream institution? I think absolutely. This is, the artists deserve the entire spectrum, no, of the art world. And was such a strong moment, I feel, in our, professional relationship when we shared that view, over others who thought no, we have our own problems to take care of, so let's not bother the others. But I think it's so reassuring to see so many projects now taking place and truly helping to change that situation. But I wanted to just follow up a little bit with something else that's kind of off script but came up now. And that came up because I also saw Fong in the screen now, and I wanted to just honor Tony Bechara for a second, and I want to just ask about artistic languages, right? Because that's also being part of the conversation, right? I honor Tony as a friend, as a supporter, as a great artist, but also as like probably the first artist, according to historiography, who had an abstract painting show at our Museo in the 80s. And this is, as his improvised, I don't have the date in front of me, but if I had to guess, I would say 83, 84, something like this. So can we just talk about this a little bit? Can we talk about art a little bit and see, a lot of artists have dealt, we just had the wonderful retrospective of Candida Alvarez at our Museo, which was the last show I curated in present body, let's put it like this, at our Museo. And Candida, she's an artist who's been really pushing these boundaries between artistic languages and what's expected from an artist that comes from a Latinx perspective or from immigrant history in the U.S. With her pursuit of a very distinctive, unique abstract language. So, can we talk about this a little bit here?
Maybe I'll just evoke also a little bit of the history that I think is crucial to the permission the artists felt they had, right, to speak in any visual language that they wanted. The founding of El Museo, the Studio Museum, Queens Museum, Bronx Museum are tied in the history of New York City to the decentralization of the education system too. So the Department of Education was centralized, but parents and teachers and activists worked together to get that department decentralized so that neighborhoods could have some say over what students in those particular schools were learning. And I think part of that tied in at the same time also with artists who were protesting large museum institutions that were not collecting specifically Black and Puerto Rican art. There was the Artist Workers Coalition, and then there was the sub caucus of the Black and Puerto Rican Artists Caucus that was also protesting at the same time. And there was a group like I think it's Sankey Group. What was the Spiral? I think it was a Spiral group. It was like Romary Bearden, Norman Lewis, a bunch of these artists who were interested in having their work in collections and doing these protests. And Norman Lewis was not going to start doing figurative work just to be represented as a Black artist in MoMA. So that freedom was an important part of the creation of these institutions and freedom for artists to feel as though they could speak in any language, in any visual language. And from early on, a Museo showed abstraction in the same way they would have shown figurative work from East Harlem painters.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that by saying I know we're talking about El Museo a lot, but we all have our shared experience there. It was a feedback we got when we started doing the Biennial of Contemporary Art. It was like, so what's specifically, Latinx about this art? It's like the artists are, but the art is in every language. And it's part also, I want to bring Carmen Ramos's important work into this room that she did in collecting for the Smithsonian Museum or American Art Museum of Latinx art and doing the big exhibition, Our America, of which we have one of the texts in the book. I think sometimes people had a hard time wrapping their mind around the fact that this is a huge diversity of artists from different times and places across the nation, working in all the formal languages that everyone else is working in. But sometimes there are, specific contexts or other contexts to bring to play, but there's also the American context, the US context, and the global art context that, of course, these artists.
And Elizabeth Ferrer, who's here, she curated an amazing show in New York around abstraction as well, no? So I wanted to acknowledge that during my years there, I think maybe it was 2019 or something like that. And that show was so important also to, reinforce that, which I think it's always so important. Yeah, so yeah, Richard Wright at the Studio Museum. There has been this moment, right, where, abstraction served as a way to say we are artists, we can do whatever we want with our work. This can't be an imposition from outside. And I think, Tony was precisely that when he had a show and he also, helped El Museo to, expand its mission and reposition itself. So I just wanted to, honor him for a second too. Um, well, a big thing for me now is global awareness, right? So this is something I'm now here. There's, very, very little knowledge. My colleagues, the curators at the museum here, fantastic curators, have wonderful, wonderful knowledge of Latin American artists. I'm learning so much about Argentinian artists at the moment, which is fantastic. But they always ask me, what about, the US people, no? So one of them saw the Chicken X body at PAM because we had the Julia Kosic there that she curated, Marita Garcia. And she told me, "Oh, I don't know any of those artists. This is like terra incognita for me entirely." And so we do have this education mission ahead of us. I find here, I would love to do something. And now I know curators who come and go between institutions are doing their due as well. Curators who come from, smaller institutions are bringing, raising awareness in large institutions in the US or outside. So how do you see this? What's next for us?
Well, tying into Tony, I mean, Tony also, in addition to being an artist and a board member and a patron, he was a patron, right? So we're starting to see some of these acquisitions, but as Arlene Davila's book, sort of looked into, there's not quite yet a market built, right? So we need people. I mean, if you want to support artists, buy their work, right? So we need people to be collecting. We need to start building up the market side a little bit of things because it's an ecosystem, right? Artists need to make money and be collected, and through collections, things get into institutions more freely. They are shared with their colleagues. That's part of the global awareness, in addition to the pure educational piece, which books like this and teaching, et cetera, all do. But there's this whole other side of it, I think.
That's exactly right. I think that one of the most important things that people can do to support the entire field is to support artists directly as much as possible. And for museums to think about how they can continue to work in this direction. These are artists that are part of the history of American art. Honestly, I say this every time I get the opportunity. Every museum in this country that has a collection of American art should have a work by Luis Jimenez. Luis Jimenez, one of the most important Tejano, born in El Paso, artists working historically. May he rest in peace. And his work is so American. It's made out of fiberglass. I mean, he thought about this obsession with cars that we have in this country, with shiny surfaces, but he brought historic narratives and border narratives into that work. And he's a huge figure. Exactly. He's a huge figure. We need to have works by Luis Jimenez in every collection. So start to, even just to think about who are the most, that's another reason, when we picked these images for the book, we thought about collections that had already started to go in this direction, which museums already had significant collections, and to draw on those for the images so that people see like these are the sacred cows of the field. It's safe to buy one for your museum collection or for your home.
Yeah, Luis Jimenez is fascinating. I agree 100%. I think there was if not a solo show, maybe a two-person show of his work at New Museum, like with Marcia Tucker, I think 83, 84, something like this, which I always wanted to, know more about. But I want to just, put like, give my 2 cents also about, back to El Museo, but specifically to Flow States, right? This is the last edition. We had Vince Valdez's slide for a while here with this gorgeous painting. Hooray to Vince Valdez, to Houston, to San Antonio, to the Tejanos. But I want to say that recently the last edition curated by myself, Susanna Temkin, and Maria Elena Ortiz was also very interesting because we put this, migratory flows on a more global perspective by inviting artists from different based in different places, which was something, very experimental for our museo to do. It was not the first time, but that was also interesting, to see how this, conversations, how open really is, that this place, right? This meeting place or this punto de encuentro. Great. I think we like gearing more towards the end, apparently, of the hour. I, asked you, very generously to, share some images so we could talk about specific artworks and, have the little bit of the, really this beautiful part of the publication, which is the visual anthology shared and in a digital format with our attendance today. So maybe we can start with that in whichever point you prefer.
Artworks from the book,
Yeah.
right?
Can
Oh,
we,
okay, yes.
can we do
Well,
that like 5 minute, like sort of just like a little, mention about specific images or artists?
that was one thing, we did. Also, we made a giant spreadsheet and we called it like, I think we called it literally like the greatest hits of US Latinx art history. Again, there could have been so many additional images that we added to this body of images. I don't know, Deb, do you want to pull one?
Yeah, I mean, like it's terrible because we got 50 images to put in here, and it's a horrible exercise to do. But like we said, we tried to focus on works in public collections with a representation of people who are already in the book and the text, and there needs to be more texts, volume 2, volume 3, because there's so much more to do here. Let's scroll to another image. Let's see what we have coming up because there's so many.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Hiram Maristani, okay, fantastic artist who was a photographer for the Young Lords. I worked a lot with the Young Lords and did documentation of El Barrio, where he was born and raised, and documented his community, and worked quietly. And those who knew, and those who didn't know, like he never had any market attention. And then I'm going to shout out also Miguel Luciano is in.
That needs to change. That needs to change more and more.
We have a lot of, but Miguel Luciano is in here somewhere, and he started working with Hiram and his estate, and did projects where his work was put out in El Barrio in very large scale. And so this is, artists working with artists doing the work of curating, artists doing the work of writing and contextualizing one another, which is not their job, but thank goodness for them. So yeah, and Miguel Luciano here we're looking at, of a younger generation now has, I think, 5 works on view in the Smithsonian. But showed it at Museo del Barrio in one of the early biennials, and we were able to acquire one of his works. So set him up, platformed him, and still working, and working now at the Smithsonian. So fantastic.
And he's gonna
Mac,
an artist talk, I think, Saturday at the Smithsonian. I think it's Friday afternoon and also Saturday during the day at the Smithsonian, The Shape of Power exhibition. Elia and Miguel, I know, are on that panel, and I think some other folks too.
And who else have we got? Do we have time for any more? Who else is
yeah,
next?
let's do a few more, couple more at least.
Guadalupe Maravilla, also, yeah, Rocío, you go.
Oh my gosh, I met Guadalupe when he was Irving Morazan working in Jersey. And so at Jersey City Museum, we invited him to do a performance. At that time, he was working with a lot of the same materials he'll end up using for the masks and the wearable sculptures that he makes, working with cotton and some natural dyes and a microwave to create these fantastic mask-like sculptures. And I think the work has just evolved so beautifully to thinking about care for community, support for disenfranchised people who have been detained by ICE, and thinking about his own story as representative of so many other stories of people who crossed all different kinds of borders to come to a new life in the United States. We're really thrilled to see the trajectory of his career.
Delilah.
That's such a great selection. You can't
I
go
know
wrong with these
it's
people.
it's it's all over, but it's beautiful. And these are related images, right? I mean, this is documentation of the water stations in the borderlands, that Delilah Montoya, among many, her enormous and important body of works. This is one of her series, that we selected for this. But each of
And photography is really the sweet spot for all of us in Latinx artists or art. It is so many amazing photography, and it just you can't go on and on. Elizabeth again has that wonderful book of hers, and that's it's I feel like it's endless. So very happy to see Delilah here, and I'm a huge fan. Just one more, maybe we can go 2 minutes or 1 minute over the hour. So we slightly subversive. Wow, a giant.
giant in his field, also has a text in the book because it's curating, writing, theorizing. Juan Sanchez, U.S. born artist with such important connections and longtime professor at Hunter. How many generations did he influence? And actually, one I met at Robert Blackburn's printmaking workshop when he was doing his first prints there in 1984. And MoMA just acquired his work. The print selection from Exeter, which we had Papo Colo earlier, the Guadican print portfolio that he was doing at Bob Blackburn's is in the Met, and there's hopefully going to be a forthcoming project with one that we're all waiting for because he deserves it. That he's amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Last one, Rocio, will you take one?
I mean, fantastic. This image in the book is spread across 2 pages because it's the magnitude of the work is not just its scale, but the weight of the story being told here. And it was a crucial acquisition, a work by Vincent Valdez for the Blanton Museum at the University of Texas. And there was controversy around that acquisition and the display of the work, but I think it just underscores so much how relevant these artists are to the history of the US and their perspective on it. And it also is an important, I think, symbol of cross-racial solidarity. And ethnic and racial solidarity, where we understand that no one is free until everyone is free. And so supporting Black people in overall, and especially thinking about these stories in US history that are currently being erased, that cannot be erased, and artists are doing the work of making sure those stories are being told.
Right on. We're at the minute mark. So if I can just ask the audience to share their questions. We are going to be here, the three of us, taking questions for the next 10 minutes. Magley?
You all so much. That was such a wonderful conversation. If anyone in the audience has a question for Deborah, Rocio, or Rodrigo, there is a link in the chat where you can submit your questions. We have a couple of questions. The first is from Juliana, and Juliana says, should I make my own syllabus of Latinx American art, or is there an inheritance version point of departure? I personally find the idea of teaching a Latinx art 21st century class in CUNY schools to be incredibly exciting, as the students are of Latinx descent of all sorts, and we could learn a lot from the CUNY Latinx student young people by talking about what Latinx art means with them and in relationship with their experiences and families and immigration journeys, etc.
This is a really good question. I think that there are certainly some syllabi online, I think that other people have used, like University of Texas has been teaching courses like this for a long time. Um, and I always think, the reason this handbook I think is helpful is that it has these historic texts from artists who were working from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And so it's sort of built in to the chronology you might want to create in a syllabus, to sort of insert these readings wherever might be most useful. And then to look at the student body and maybe even co-create a syllabus with them to mirror their experiences. That's tricky, right? It takes more time, but I always think it's so good to do that kind of work collaboratively. Actually, as soon as Deb and I were done making our syllabus and teaching our course at IFA, we thought we would just redo the whole thing a different way. There's just so many possibilities with this work.
Thank you. The next question is from an anonymous audience member who asks, I love the idea of the book being a series of entryways to explore more and expand knowledge. Has the Handbook of Latinx Art been utilized in any ways or a launching point in any way that have surprised you?
Well, I'm going to answer and say we're not quite sure yet. We would love to hear from people how it's being used. I mean, we're acutely aware of everything else that could be done, that, there were limitations on what we were able to do, but we hope to hear from people how it's being used. Yeah, and I think just it was good today to articulate the connection between the images and the texts a little bit, how we selected the text and the images, because it's just, one way to select. But just like with the syllabus question, you could reframe and remix this in many, many different ways according to your interests.
Then I have a question. You briefly mentioned that there could be a second or third part to this book. Do you think that is something that you all would want to pursue and like maybe expanding the artists that are included and kind of navigating different topics and ideas and breaking it up differently?
That's a great question. And I think we built into our intro saying that this is just the starting point, and we invite so many other people with their knowledge to share what their idea would be. I'm working on an anthology with two other scholars, with new writings, all about contemporary US. Actually, it's historic and contemporary, so we're starting maybe with the 40s and 50s. I think someone's doing an essay on the 40s and 50s to more contemporary work. So there's so much space in this field for this work. It's at this point, we've literally only scratched the surface.
Thank you for that answer. The last question is going to come from Fong. I'm going to give Fong a chance to unmute and ask.
Thank you so much. Am I seeing everybody on the screen here? Yes, thank you.
Here.
Great. Good to see you, Deborah. Good to see you, Rocio.
Hi,
And Rodrigo, no longer in New York City.
Sadly not.
I know, I know. We want you back. But
Bound to return one day. I will.
okay, good. I'm glad. I'm just happy that you mentioned our dear friend Tony Bichero,
Yeah.
who did so much in commitment to Museum del Barrio and beyond. There's one thing that I must add that I don't know. I think when I came to New York, I was fortunate enough to have met several people, including Don Judd, in the late 80s, I think maybe in 89. And I did ask him a question about what prompted him to be a writer, to be an art critic. And he told me that he was inspired by a previous student of Shapiro at Columbia, namely Alan Cabral, in 1963, I believe, who wrote the famous essay, Should an Artist Be the Man, Woman, today should be added, of the World? It meant that it's not enough to be an artist like the old days, like the first, second generation of New York school. You have to learn to be your publicist. You have to be your own advocate, really, of your work, talking about your work, writing about your work, be there, involved in the social context. And he also said that in case my work might not pan out well, since I am an admirer of Van Gogh, who wrote 1,200 something letters, ensuring whether his painting might not be remembered, at least there's a documentation of his writing, his wonderful letters. I think Candida and I talked about this once about that subject. And it's so fascinating in thinking about that context because it brings right back to the fear of being forgotten. It's a broader universal concern, an issue. When we interviewed Raphael in the summer 2022 with Anna Christina Perry, I just saw an image of his work not long ago from the beginning. I realized it's a radical conceptual work. I mean, that's up there with David Hammond.
Among other things.
Among other things. No, that's what I meant. I mean, David is very clever and fortunate enough to have a group of small people who really committed in supporting him. So he can become the classic hedgehog, you know? But many, many artists from all the so-called less puritanical culture, shall we say, the puritanical leaning in temperament tend to be the hedgehog. They do one thing and they thrive on that very singular goal. Where the fox to whom the world cannot be boiled down on single reading. There's no way. So I'm referring of the multitude of activities that we all have to do. Because, I remember when Tony brought, Rodrigo to my home, actually sitting on that bench and sharing the whole beautiful story of how Tony has supported our friend Carmen, who I have the fortune to meet in 2013. The very same year that I joined the studio in the school, Aggie Gunn's beloved living organism, which I don't know, Tony was there from the beginning. I don't know how he had time to do it, you guys. I really don't. But he was advocating for Carmen a long time. And he shared the story how Nicholas Loxdale wanted to see those works, right? The Rigo, 2012, I believe.
And the rest is history.
And the rest of history. So my point is, okay, do I have a question? I think I do. What is the question, Fong? The question is, I remember there was I know that the breakout with Carmen was a huge event because I remember it was, I don't know, Alex Loxdale talking to Adam Weinberg and some curator at the Whitney. You better do it before she leave us. So that was a pressure from which they, believe it or not, did in 1 year. Just she turned 100 at that big show, the Whitney. As you say, Rodrigo, the rest is history. So that helped and certainly elevate the visibility of other artists that we know.
I
at
think Carmen is
92.
such an inspiration because
Yeah,
she worked without a lot of attention
yeah.
for a while. You remember she used to show with a Brazilian gallery. I can't remember the name, Midtown.
Latin
And
collector.
Latin collector,
oh,
Federico.
oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, and to not much repercussion.
Hmm.
And she was already, she already had all that work. And the first time I saw it with different eyes was actually with Alex in Prismasters in London. I think the year was 2011. But I think this is besides the point because my point is that she was somebody who, had the support to trust her work and she went for it. And
Hmm.
that's, and the rest is history. So I'm grateful you brought up Carmen Herrera because she's been such a fantastic source of inspiration for all of us. And I think I would say for female artists, you look up Carmen Herrera always, and her perseverance. That's the
Hmm.
key.
Yeah, what I meant by that too, Rico, and I'm throwing it out there because I remember in 1991 reading the New York Times, Madonna bought several, at least two Frida Kahlo paintings and claimed that she had been a fan, admirer from the beginning. She was a kid, a child. You know, the ambition of Madonna is kind of intense. You probably remember Camille Paglia, great book, Sexual Persona. Remember Rocío? Okay, the identification of Madonna and Frida Kahlo is kind of strangely somehow, alchemized together, but it makes sense. My point is that I believe that it helped to elevate Frida Kahlo's reputation among younger people for sure. It's never been, uh, you know, applaud with such universal sweep until Madonna advocated, championing her work, and ended up owning, I don't know, 10 paintings consequentially. So my point is that Carmen was that for a lot of people. And now the question is, now that I see Candida here, eager to talk, we've been friends a long time, Candida and I. So what I'm trying to bring up is that the fluid state, the show, the triennial at Museo was a terrific demonstration of the fluidity of how the artists that you both been champion, we all been champion. They're not one dimensional. It's very important to declare that it's not unidimensional. It's very complex. It's Fock-like temperament. It can move changes in
And it's
permutation.
fluid. I love that you're saying this. Thanks for saying this. It's
Super
fluid.
important. I'm not. I don't belong to Latin American culture, but I'm learning from it. Trust me, I'm learning from it. Like I'm learning from Candida. The last show she had at Paul Gray is paired with Bob Thompson. So it's not reductive. My point is, reductiveness is a deadly pigeonhole any artist to begin with. So I just want to make that comment and whether you would, I don't know, elucidate a little bit further on that multiplicity and the ability to do so many things all at once. Is that a fair observation?
I mean, ditto. I think I'll leave it where you left because you touched on fluidity, and I was, we were having these conversations when we were preparing. These things change. Maybe they are spectrum. They maybe it's they change overnight. But I think there's also to be said that I really want to say, still agreeing with you, is that sometimes defining oneself with an identity serves a group that doesn't get to be seen any other way. And that's very important. This is a conversation I had with my colleague from Museo del Barrio, no, from Museo del Barrio here in Paraguay,
Mm.
uh, in the Venice Biennial. Adriano organized the roundtable, and we all talked about this. And And we were talking about arte popular, popular art, and people say, "Oh, we don't care about labels, art is art." Well, except if you need it, right, to call it something. So that's something that I want to add to your perspective, with which I agree 100%. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. Back to you, Matley.
You, Fong. We are going to close with two videos that Rocío and Deborah shared. I'll give you guys to introduce the video and I'll share them.
There are two short videos of Pedro Pietri, who fits all of the categories we were just talking about: artist, activist, poet, playwright, doing all of the things in East Harlem in the 60s, 70s. And one is called New Eurekan Obituary, and the other one is Phone Booth, I think. Deb should say more.
Sorry, I'm just looking for the title. It's so Puerto Rican Obituary is a very early work that he did. And it's one of the phone booths. And I don't remember the number. My bad, Maglie. Do you remember the number of the phone booth?
I'll share it and we'll see.
905.5. So with a little Sing Pedro Petri a little later in his.
New Eurekan poetry is the best. If you haven't read it, read it. It's the best.
They worked. They were always on time. They were never late. They never spoke back when they were insulted. They worked. They never went on strike without permission. They never took days off that were not on the calendar. They worked 10 days a week and were only paid for 5. They worked, they worked, they worked and they died. They died broke. They died owing. They died never knowing what the front entrance of the First National City Bank looks like. Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, all died yesterday, today, and will die again tomorrow, passing their bill collectors on to the next of kin. All die waiting for the Garden of Eden to open up again under a new management. All die dreaming about America, waking them up in the middle of the night screaming, "Mira, mira, your name is on the winning lottery ticket for $100,000. All die hating the grocery stores that sold them make-believe steak and bulletproof rice and beans. All die dreaming, hating, and waiting. Dead Puerto Ricans who never knew they were Puerto Ricans, who never took a coffee break from the 10 Commandments to kill, kill, kill the landlords of their cracked skulls and communicate with their Latin souls. Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, from the nervous breakdown streets where the mice live like millionaires and the people do not live at all. They are dead, and will not return from the dead until they stop neglecting the art of their dialogue for broken English lessons to impress the system who keeps them employed as lavaplatos, porters, messenger boys, factory workers, maids, stock clerks, shipping clerks, assistant mailroom assistant to the assistant lavaplatos, and automatic artificial smiling doorman for the lowest wages of the ages and rages when you demand a raise because it's against the company policies to promote spics. Here lies Juan, here lies Miguel, here lies Milagros, here lies Olga, here lies Manuel, who died yesterday, today, and will die again tomorrow, always broke, always owing, never knowing that they are beautiful people.
This morning,
Nobody believed me at first, but now everybody wants a pair.
So sorry.
This morning, feeling excellent, picked up the telephone, dialed the number of my equal opportunity employer to inform him I will not be in to work today. Are you feeling sick, the boss asked me. No, sir, I replied, I am feeling too good to report to work today. If I feel sick tomorrow, I will come in early.
Thank you all so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Rocío, Deborah, and Rodrigo. Thank you, Emily from University of California Press, for your support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSC program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Katie Hessel and Kathy Bradford on the Great Women Artists, a podcast all about celebrating women artists. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much.
Ciao.
Thank you
so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rodrigo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rocío. Thank
Saludos.
you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Deborah.
Rodrigo.
Yeah,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rodrigo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.